Kia ora and welcome to the Niggly Niche Cast. I'm the Diggity Doodah, Dr. Peptoy Panther, Mr. Slippers here for a football edition of the Niche Cast. We are joined by the Wobbly Wildcard and we are going to get our usual dose of his Flying Kiwis perspective. And then we will turn our focus within the land of Aotearoa to check in with the Wellington Phoenix. Now, we are recording this football episode, then we are also recording a basketball episode touching on the New Zealand Aotearoa Breakers and Stephen Adams, Sean Marks in the NBA. So this football episode and a basketball episode will be on your feed, however you consume the Niche Cast, so keep an eye on those. And then on our plate over the next few days, I will be doing a Rugby League one with International Rugby League coming up this week, and then we'll do a full Plunkett Shield episode of the Niche Cast. So busy times on your podcast feed, again, however you get it, up to you, bruh. Wobbly Wildcard, how go thee?
Well, I got down to the football paddock and managed to have a bit of a kick around on the weekend, which means that, you know how every summer you don't quite know, like, the transition of the seasons, it's always a little bit of a murky thing, like, okay, we know the exact date, 1st of whatever the hell, 1st of September, isn't it, the start of spring, but, like, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to stop raining or it's going to be sunny, and, you know, when the real, well, you know, our bodies have these funny ways of keeping up with time, and there are very natural ways that we can measure these things if we just pay attention to the clues. And one that I always seem to have is I can tell the transition between, like, the cold half of spring and the warm half of spring for when I get that first real kick of sunburn. And my forehead and nose are currently peeling pretty substantially, so I think we might have crossed that barrier, Doc.
That's a dubious statement, Wildcard, because it's pissing down with rain everywhere, and I just think you lacked a bit of sunscreen.
Well, both of these things might be true. I'm not here to debate absolutes here. They can both be true statements.
I'll be believing, again, weather talk. Beautiful weather talk at the start of another episode of the Niche Cast. I'll be believing in the arrival of summer when we get multiple days of sunshine here in Okalangi, which hasn't been the case for at least kind of 3 to 4 months. So I beg to differ, but if you're the one with the sunburn, mate, you call the shots.
I'm also the one chilling in the sunny north as well, so, you know, I get my buffer for sun is a little lower than yours.
And I cannot believe we've started with weather talk. Quickly, Wildcard, take me around the world of Flying Kiwis football and pick out a couple of our favourite footballing exports who are doing big things around the world. Who you got this week?
Well, there's a very special week this week. It was playoff week in America, which means that both the MLS and the NWSL, the Major League Soccer and the National Women's Soccer League, soccer, heading into their playoff rounds, first round of the playoffs for everyone, except for the second division USL, which starts today, I think. They have these sort of playoffs. You know how in baseball and baseball most specifically, they have like a wild card round, which is just a little one-off game before the playoffs, and they've sort of done this in the USL where they call them the play-ins, which is a terrible pun, but Sam Brotherton's North Carolina are playing in one of those. So there are a couple teams in the USL. James Moose's Phoenix Rising, he doesn't necessarily play for them every week. He sort of plays 2/3 of the games. Usually on the bench is like an impact sub, bring on a defensive midfielder when they're winning, which they normally do because they've just broken the record for the most points in a season, I think, something like that, for the Phoenix Rising, looking good to win the USL if they can carry that form into the playoffs when it really matters, which would be great for James Musa, who is I think he was injured he was injured last year for their playoff run, and they lost in the final. And the year before that, he was at a different team, and they also lost in the final so he's beaten finalists twice in a row, although he didn't play as prominent a role last time as he would have liked to. But yeah, keep an eye on that one coming up. But the playoffs, very important time for for Kiwi footy players in America, of course, because every year there seems to be one who makes a big run. Last year, Bill Tuiloma's Portland Timbers made a good run to the MLS final, the grand final, where they lost to Atlanta United. And for Bill Tuiloma, it was really a bit of a breakout time for him, because he'd been a defensive utility on the bench leading up to that, but then their main defender got injured early in the playoffs. He had to come in and start a couple games. He played off the bench once or twice either, and it really sort of him coming in, solidifying that backline at a crucial time, really kind of kickstarted, well, not kickstarted, because he'd already got himself into a pretty good position, but that proved to a lot of Portland fans and probably the coaches as well that he could be a starter at MLS level. This season he mostly was a starter in a little period where he was injured, but other than that, so coming into the playoffs, him and the dude who he replaced last year, Laris Mabiala, who got injured, those two were the starting centre-backs for Portland. Real Salt Lake was who they drew. They were away. They sort of didn't have the best season, Portland, which is why they didn't get the best seeding and the best thing. And cut a long story short, they were short a couple guys. They had one of the best playmakers injured. Their top scorer turns out to have a couple issues with the old cocaine, so he isn't playing at the moment. Really terrible timing for that, to be honest. It was like a thing where he checked himself into rehab ahead of time because he worried he was going to relapse. So best wishes to, fellas going through things. You always got to take care of yourself first and foremost. But yeah, the Timbers didn't do the best. They fell behind relatively early. They managed to claw one back straight after half-time after a terrible first half where they were lucky not to be down more than one, but then a fella called Jefferson Savarino scored late, so they got knocked out, lost 2-1 to Real Salt Lake. Moving on, Michael Boxall's Minnesota United, the other Kiwi to have made the MLS playoffs. Their first ever playoff game for the team. They could have finished higher if they'd been a little bit better at just closing out some of those games towards the end of the season. But even still, a home playoff game against Zlatan Ibrahimovic's LA Galaxy. Michael Boxall tasked with guarding Zlatan Ibrahimovic, the self-proclaimed greatest player to ever play in the MLS. So, a bit of fun there. Could he shut him down? Could he stop him? Yeah, he kind of did. There was a moment in the second half where he was able to slide across, block a shot from Zlatan. Pretty important intervention there, carrying on with the fact that he was able to keep Zlatan Zlatan had one good opportunity where he broke the defense but couldn't score past the keeper. Other than that, they kept him relatively quiet. The only problem is that block that Boxall made of Zlatan then fell to another guy who ran on and scored, and then LA Galaxy scored straight away after that, so 2 goals in a couple minutes. And Minnesota, who had been probably the dominant team up until then, but just couldn't take their chances, weren't able then to respond until quite late. Jan Gregus scored with a couple minutes left, which gave them a hint of a chance of coming back, but weren't able to do it. So they lost as well, which means that both the Kiwis to make the MLS playoffs are done, so we can shut that one down for the year. No need to watch any more male football in America. However, the NWSL, Abby Erceg's North Carolina Courage, who seemed to finish first, they finished first 3 years in a row because she's the captain and gets to lift the NWSL Shield for the regular season. Each one of those times, they are looking to go back-to-back for the title. They played Seattle Reign, who are Rosie White's team, but Rosie White was sort of signed mid-season after the World Cup because there'd been a lot of injuries at that team as the season progressed. And she came in, she scored a couple goals, was pretty, really, if you take out her little impact that she had at the time when she signed, they probably don't make the playoffs. So really important acquisition there, but as the season went on towards the end, other players came back from injury, and you back the players that you've had, building throughout the entire season with. So Rosie White fell back to the bench. She was an unused sub in this game. Abby Erceg had gone off injured in her previous game, the last game of the regular season, but no dramas there. Just happened to be a case of precautions ahead of the semifinals. So North Carolina Courage come out, play real strong as they always do, but they also have this tendency to dominate games, create heaps of chances, lots of shots, and then just not score a whole lot of them. So it took them a long time to get a breakthrough, and they finally did. It was about the 80-something minute. They won a penalty. They score the penalty. Finally looks like they're going to go through. It's taken all this time to get the breakthrough, and then straight down the other end, somehow Seattle managed to score immediately. They score in injury time of the second half. Takes us into extra time. Seattle, with their hopes up, just scored a dramatic late equalizer. North Carolina a little bit rocked by the fact that they thought they were going through, and then suddenly they got to play another half hours. Absolutely no dramas there. They dominated the extra time period. Scored 3 more goals, won at 4-1. They're through to the final, where they will face the Chicago Red Stars, who have Australian Sam Kerr. So if we're talking about Boxall versus Zlatan, this is the Kiwi women's football equivalent of that, is Abby Erceg marking Sam Kerr. As it happens, Sam Kerr's just broken the record for the most goals in NWSL season, and she's added another one to that in the playoffs by scoring the only goal in Chicago's 1-0 win over Portland. Chicago haven't lost to North Carolina this year, even though North Carolina finished first. I think they drew once and lost twice, or drew twice and lost once to Chicago. They will be at home, the Courage, so that's a little bit of a boost. But yeah, Sam Kerr has scored. I think she's scored in all 3 of those games that they've played. So she tends to do pretty well against Erceg and the Courage. So that is certainly not going to be. Courage are going to be favourites. They are the best team throughout the whole season. They've traditionally been the best team the last few years, but if they have a bogey team, if they have a weakness, it's Sam Kerr and it's the Chicago Red Stars. So that is going to be a tricky one. That is on Monday. Let me check the thing. It's on Monday morning, I think, at 9:30 a.m. 9:30 a.m. North Carolina Courage versus Chicago Red Stars. So lock that one in on the calendar, Doc, and there you go. Flying Kiwis updates for this week, focusing on the American playoff system. Not so great for most of them, but Abby Erceg still leading the way as always, looking like she's hoping to be challenging for hoping to be lifting another NWSL championship trophy.
Rightio, Wildcard, nice job on that. What we're going to do for the Phoenix and Breakers, I am going to rattle off a series of questions, and I just want a hard and fast answer. I just don't, no bigger discussions. I just want you to answer my intriguing questions, and
fire away.
Offer a bit of structure and keep things moving here with regards to the Wellington Phoenix and the New Zealand Breakers in our basketball podcast. The Wellington Phoenix, they suffered a defeat to Sydney FC 2-1, so they've lost their first 2 games of the season. What is one thing that has impressed you the most from the 2 losses to start this season, Wildcard?
I would say the most impressive thing from these 2 defeats has been the fact that we knew this was going to be a team that would take some time to get settled, same as the Breakers as well. It's probably a theme we'll have in our other podcast. A lot of stuff going on in the off-season, a lot of change, 3/4 of a new squad, new manager looking to play a new style, new formation. Lots of players coming from different areas of the globe as well, so all this kind of thing, merging everything together, it was going to take a little bit of time. What I've been most impressed by over the first 2 games, although it hasn't led to the results that we would like to see, I think we have seen solid progress even within these 2 games. I think both games the Phoenix got considerably better after halftime. So as the game went on, they improved, they settled in, they got more used to playing with each other in combinations, they got better in creating chances and making things happen. So that's promising. You also saw considerable improvements, I think, between games as well, from the first game to the second game, where the first game they got in some good positions, they tried a few things, but just up front it just wasn't clicking at all. I thought we saw considerably better efforts from both David Ball and Ulysses Davia, who sort of got carried in the first game. Ball had a couple moments in the first game, but wasn't able to score 1 or 2 of those chances, which maybe if he had, it would have made things look a lot different. I thought Davia was pretty shocking in the first game, but moving on, I then thought he was the best player in the second game. So that's exactly what you want to see, players making improvements, imports as well. It might take a little while. Davia, I think, looked like he was getting rattled a little bit by the physicality and the way the games were being reffed in the A-League. It's still not something he's been through before. He seemed to like having the ball at his feet and being able to play in tight spaces, but in the A-League you don't get tight spaces without getting kicked on the shin over and over and over. So yeah, I think he just sort of got caught off guard in the first game. Second game, adjusted brilliantly, scored a goal, was the best player on the field, I thought, and David Ball was a close second. So that's what I like to see. They created a lot more chances in the second game. Finishing is still an issue.
What's your thing? Is it the improvement?
General improvements.
General improvement.
General
Great.
improvements from week on, week out. However that saying's supposed to go.
What is the biggest work on right now that the Phoenix have to take them forward and get a win? Like, so they've made a lot of improvement in these 2 games. What's something that is going to help them get a win and then get a couple of consistent wins? So what's one thing that could see them get to where they want to get to, where you want them to get to in the coming weeks as well?
Yeah, you timed that question perfectly, because if they continue these improvements from, the first week they didn't create enough chances, second week they created a lot more chances, but they didn't score them. So the third week, what you need to do, the natural progress from that, is to start scoring some of these chances. Get some more shots on target, get some shots in better areas, score some bloody goals, basically.
Who's offering the greatest threat at the moment from your perspective in terms of scoring goals?
I think the guy who's been the most creative, created the most chances so far has been Callum McCower, but he's also, everyone is new to the A-League and these things except for Soterio, who's probably the most vulnerable player. But I think the guy who is the answer to that question is the guy who hasn't played yet, which is Gary Hooper. So coming in, a guy who's been the top goal scorer in Scotland, has his injury issues, hasn't played a lot of football in the last 2 years, but if he's ready to go, if he's fit and healthy and firing against Perth Glory, he has the caliber, the ability to be the guy to be able to put these chances away. So Uffie Talai called him the last piece of the puzzle. I think that's if that's the case, if that's the case, then that is the last piece of the puzzle to be done, is to start scoring these goals, start scoring these chances they're creating.
This week they play Perth Glory. Where do Perth Glory sit on the ladder? How are they looking to start this season?
Well, they were the best team throughout the regular season last year. I haven't seen them play this year, so I'm not sure. I'll check that just quickly. Last year, the Phoenix really struggled against Perth when they played them away, but when they got them at home, they had a pretty... I can't remember if they lost or they drew it, but it was a relatively early on game where it's sort of one of those games which started their season to start going in the right direction, where it was the one where the old mate Ryan Lowry came off the bench and then got a really stupid VAR red card, but against one of the best teams, the Phoenix showed that they could actually play some football. I don't think they've been as good this year, Perth. No, they've drawn both their games, so, room for improvement. They're exactly the type of team. They drew 1-1 against Brisbane and then 1-1 against Western United. So, I mean, Brisbane and Western United don't strike me as teams that are going to be finishing in the top few spots. So, Perth certainly starting slowly because they should be up near the top of the table. But, away to New Zealand, they call it the distance derby. That's not an easy game. It's a very long way to travel, and the home team always has the advantage in those ones. So, I would like to see... I think the Phoenix have a good chance of doing something decent in that one.
Is your MVP from those first 2 games Callum McCower?
Well, he was definitely the MVP from the first game. I don't know if I would say it overall for the first 2, because I think the second game he got targeted just a little bit more. They tried to work him. He's got good energy. He's real fit, so he works hard. But Sydney definitely tried to keep him pegged back by throwing Ryan Grant overlapping on that side, and so yeah, they worked him hard. They targeted him a little bit, not overly, but I think that helped in terms of creating some spaces on the other side. But I don't know, overall, I think if you're looking for the most consistent through 2 games, I think the midfield's been really good. So Matty Steinman would be a guy who'd be in that conversation. I think Stefan Marinovic has played very well in goal. Luke De Vera as well at centre-back, I think, has had 2 pretty solid games. So yeah, there's a couple options there. I'm tempted to lean towards Matty Steinman, but this early on, it could change at the drop of a hat at this point. Every game adds so much more new knowledge to the whole situation.
And just what's your basic general vibe from Coach Uffie Talai? Is he someone who you can envision having the similar impact to Mark Rudin? Is he going to just have a positive influence on this Wellington Phoenix team over the course of the season and I guess go one step further than Rudin and sticking around and building something long term? Just what's your general vibe from Talai in these opening stages of the season?
That is something I wrote a little bit about in the match recap this week, because it's something that I've been thinking about quite a lot. And there's a lot of places in where these two are really similar. I mean, their mates are both signed out of Sydney FC. They're both guys that go way back, played together a few times. They have experience coaching at youth level, and there's a lot of overlap there between the two. And I think when Talai was signed, it was probably hoped he would be just a really smooth transition on from Rudan. But then, of course, they had to rebuild the entire damn squad pretty much. So that idea of any kind of smooth transition went out the window. I think Talai, what's impressed me so far is the things that he doesn't have in common with Rudan, which I think are a little bit more suited and more suited to success. I think he's not a guy who's going to come out blustery, wearing his heart in his sleeve, big emotions in the press conferences like Rudan would now and then. Talai just sort of sits there quietly and mumbles into the microphone, says what he thinks, and keeps it at that. No nonsense. I think people find that quite refreshing after Rudan, who at first everyone loved all the bluster, but then when it turned out he was able to, once people got the idea that he was hiding something from them, that turned into a weapon rather than a friend. So I think that's something that's been a happy change, probably, just under the circumstances. But more than anything, I think Rudan was a great leader of men, a great, inspiring figure. But tactically, there were still a lot of holes in that Wellington Phoenix side. And there are two aspects to this. One is that I think Talai, although he has a much more raw squad, I think it's a squad that, while there's a lot of difference between, floor and ceiling, I think the ceiling is a lot higher this time. The only thing, really, that Mark Rudan had that Talai doesn't have was Roy Krishna. And if Roy Krishna's output can be matched by Gary Hooper, suddenly different story. Because I think Talai seems like he strikes me as a guy who's more tactically astute, more able to the way he's used his subs so far, and I think it's been really impressive in these two games, really trying to, without taking stupid risks, really trying to find a way just to alter the course of games and get Phoenix back into it. So he's had a good influence in those ways, and I think, I think the club's in pretty steady hands under Ufuk Talai so far, from what we've seen at least.
Beautiful, mate. We'll wrap it up there, and we will most likely come back to talk through the Wellington Phoenix game against Perth Glory. We'll have more Flying Kiwis to touch on as well, and I believe there's some local footy on the cards coming up, Wildcard.
Yeah, Kiwi Premiership not too far away, 2nd of November I think it is. Either way, it's the weekend after this weekend, so expect to, keep your eyes peeled, because you can expect to see plenty of I got a couple of things up my sleeve in terms of previews and stuff, looking forward to the new season, so, eyes peeled.
Eyes peeled, sunblock on, hats
yeah,
on, summer's here. Sunburn is here. I think as a Kiwi, you're this is terrible to say because we got that massive hole in the ozone layer above us, and it's not good, but I think every Kiwi is welcome to get sunburnt to the extent where they peel once a summer. I think it's just how it is in New Zealand. You just got to get sunburnt to peel once a summer. Put your life in the mixer, I guess, because it's not healthy, but it's just part of being a Kiwi. Some days you're just going to get sunburnt, and you learn your lesson. Is how it goes, isn't it, Wildcard?
Yes, it's certainly how it goes for me. I get that. I just every single year, it seems to be the same thing. I get that one killer sunburn at the start. Just the first time when I have to realise that the weather's getting a little bit hotter, and even if it's not consistent, I mean, it's been raining here too today, actually. But it's just that sort of that click into action where I need to be ready. And next opportunity I'm gonna pick up a tub of sunscreen and just keep it in the car or something, so I don't have to forget it, because you get complacent otherwise, and during winter you get used to not thinking about those things, and then once it gets you, I tend not to get another crazy one throughout the season. It's always just that first one that catches me off guard,
Lovely jubbly. We'll wrap it up there. That's another episode of the Niche Cast. If you do like basketball, tune into that basketball episode. Stephen Adams, Sean Marks, New Zealand Breakers. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening. If you made it this far, and you like what we're doing here at the Niche Case, jump on Patreon, support us directly on Patreon. We're slowly but steadily building our little Patreon whānau, so it's good to see. It's amazing for us, and any generosity that we receive through Patreon is going to be returned in full to you as a Niche Case Patreon. So definitely appreciate that. That is the best way to support us.
Patreon exclusive podcast just went up as well, just quietly.
It certainly did. So that's one example. And yeah, kia kaha, stay beautiful, and cheer.